Hi, it's Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. I hope you're well. I'm here with my September wrap-up, so I'll get straight into it. I've got quite a few books to get through. The first one is Guapa by Saleem Haddad, and this was a belated Pride Month read from June, so I got there in the end, and it's been on my shelves for about a year, and I'm really glad I did get to it. I really enjoyed this. So it's about Raza, who's a young gay man. He's a translator and also spends his evenings at a club called Guapa. He has a boyfriend called Taimur, but Taimur's about to get married, so that's a problem. And then his grandmother discovers them, and so it's a disaster. She won't speak to Raza, and then Taimur's about to go and get married, so his life is sort of crumbling a bit, and he's navigating that, and also whether he'll go to the wedding and going off to do jobs. Some of his jobs are quite dangerous. He goes into conflict zones and all through checkpoints at various points in this Middle Eastern city, and then during the course of those few days, he's then has flashbacks and thinks about, we go back to different points in his life of how he got there, including his past as a student in the US and things like that. So you get a whole picture of his life, and it's moving to this point of, will he confront his grandmother? Will he confront Taimur? How is he going to move forward as a gay man and as an Arab? And the conflicting loyalties, the sense of shame that he feels. But it's all done with a really engaging writing style, very lively, great sense of humour, and it's got a real sense of place. And the only thing I wanted was to name the city. I really wanted to be grounded in exactly which city it was, but it's deliberately not named, and the author has spoken about different readers thinking it was their city. So Cairo is a good example because it's set in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, and it does seem to have elements of Cairo about it, but he said he likes the fact that it could be any city. It's got a great sense of place, lots of descriptions of food and the culture, the hospitality, the generosity, and the language, and all of that is sort of infused into the story. So I really enjoyed it. That's Guapa by Saleem Haddad. Next is Summer by Ali Smith, this fourth and final one in the seasonal quartet. What an achievement. So Amanda and I just did this on the podcast. We both loved it. It was not our favourite of all of the 4 books, but that's setting a very high bar anyway. So this is the story of Robert and Sasha, who are young siblings. They're about 13 and 15 or thereabouts, and their mother Grace, so they live in England with their mother Grace, who was an actor. She voted for Brexit, so that's divided the family somewhat. And then Art and Charlotte come to visit them, and they all go off together to visit Daniel Gluck, who was a German and interned by the English during World War II. And so it sort of draws parallels between how Britain has viewed people from other cultures and other countries, and how they've detained them in different ways, including asylum seekers today. But also Art and Charlotte were also in one of the other books, I think in Winter. So it's nice, if you have read the other books, to see what's happened to some of those characters and to meet them again. That I just love the witty wordplay of Ali Smith's writing, the intelligence, the fact that she'll give you, and it's in real time, so you're getting political excerpts of things that have happened that really make you stop and think. But equally, she does it with such a light touch that it doesn't, it's not heavy. And she also references Shakespeare and Charles Dickens. So I think it's David Copperfield and Shakespeare's A Winter's Tale, and the filmmaker Lorenzo Mazzotti, I want to say, is in the book as well. And I'm not familiar with her work, and I have not read David Copperfield or Winter's Tale, still really enjoyed it. So I think if you know those other works more deeply, you'll get an even richer enjoyment of the book. But again, it's just an incredible achievement, and I really flew through this. It's a very easy read but thought-provoking, so I recommend it. And so that's summer, and then inspired partly by that, I read The Garden Party and Other Stories by Katherine Mansfield, and this has been on my shelf. It's a very daggy edition, I have to say. I don't love this cover, but it's been on my shelf for over a year as well. Katherine Mansfield was a New Zealand writer, but she lived partly in London and indeed I think went to Switzerland, where some of these are set, and she was a contemporary of Virginia Woolf. And so this was published in about 1922, and she died young of tuberculosis. So the stories were written when she was dying and written quite quickly. And that gives them, I think, a real energy. And her writing style is lively anyway, and really clean, and it's really the art of the short story, because she gives you an insight into a whole life of a character just with one aspect of their life, or one scene, or one, a day in their life. So accomplished how she can do that. And the stories range from, she's very good on family dynamics and siblings, and there are two sisters, Con and Jug, or Constantina and Josephine, whose father has died, and she gives you their dynamics and how they're afraid of their housekeeper, and what their decisions are going to be about to do with their father's things. And it's really, it really rings true. There's a lot of honesty in her writing, and she doesn't sugarcoat anything, so she gives you the characters warts and all. And there's a scene of a single woman who goes to a park on a Sunday, and it's as simple as that, and it really ebbs and flows in terms of her happiness, and it doesn't let you off easily either. And I just found that one really poignant. There's a wonderful one of a girl going to her first ball. There's a marriage that goes askew, and so I enjoyed these. I recommend it. That's The Garden Party and Other Stories by Katherine Mansfield. Speaking of siblings and families, Sisters by Daisy Johnson. So this is her second novel, and Annie and I just did it for the podcast. We both loved it, but I took a while to really get into it. It's two sisters, July and September. They go to a creepy old house with their mother because something has happened at home. Something's happened at school, and they've had to leave their home in Oxford and move to this house near the beach. And it's a very strange dynamic. So July is very dependent on September, and July is fragile. She doesn't cope with anything very well, and September's a bully and manipulative and domineering. So in different ways, they're both quite unlikable characters, and the house is also not very attractive. It's sort of falling down, and there's sort of mouldy food in the back of the cupboard and things like that. And so at first I was thinking, I don't really want to be here with them. But then the tension builds and builds, and I could not put this down. It's only a short novel. I can't say much more because I don't want to spoil it, but it really packs a punch. And Annie did say it's one that you'll want to buddy read, because you will want to talk about it with someone after you've read the ending. So if you have read it, let me know. But we've got, I think it's up now, our podcast episode on this one, Sisters. And yes, highly recommended. Daisy Johnson's incredible. I think she's so talented. So that's that one. And then a belated Women in Translation Month read. So this was for the Women in Translation Readathon that was hosted by Matthew Sharappa and Kendra Winchester and Jennifer from Insert Literary Pun Here. And this was Trapped by Lilja Sigurdardottir, translated by, I want to say Quentin Bates. Translated by Quentin Bates. So this is an Icelandic novel, and she's been described as, her style is Icelandic noir meets Mexican telenovela, which I think is a great description. And it's partly set in Florida, but then it moves back to Reykjavik and London as well. So I loved that city hopping, especially since we're all a bit housebound at the moment. It's got great, sense of place. The main character is Sonia, who's been inadvertently dragged into a drug smuggling operation. Her girlfriend is called Agla, who's a banker. Sonia's ex-husband is sort of the villain of the piece, and there's also a customs officer called Bragi, who's a good character as well. And there's a new character in this one who's a prosecutor, I've forgotten her name, who's on the chase as well. And some of it's a bit more heightened. This is the second in the trilogy. So the first book was called Snare, and I read that earlier this year, so I can't say too much about the plot, just in case you haven't read Snare. Not that you have to read both, but just in case that gives anything away if you did want to read Snare. But I really enjoyed it. I love her style. It's got a sense of humour, great sense of place, and it's fresh. It feels original, and as I said, that element of Mexican telenovela, so it's got this heightened drama but done with a sort of a nod and a wink, I suppose. So I just really enjoyed it. That's Trap by Lilja Sigurdardottir, highly recommended. And another crime, Attica, Locke, Heaven My Home. So again, loved it, highly recommend. Also the second of a trilogy. So this is the Highway 59 trilogy with Darren Matthews, who's a black Texas Ranger. And in this one, he's solving the case of a missing white boy whose father is a white supremacist. So that brings up conflict, sort of conflicting loyalties for Darren Matthews. He's got issues with his wife, who doesn't want him to be on the road. His mother, who's manipulative, and they have a difficult relationship, and a few other things as well are at play. So really interesting. I love him as he's a complex protagonist, and interesting mystery to solve as well, and again a really good sense of place. So in Texas and with the river, or the Bayou I think it is, and realistic characters. So that's Heaven My Home. Also in America, Heartland by Sarah Smarsh, and this is her memoir of working hard and being broke in the richest country on earth, and it does what it says on the tin. It is a memoir. I would have liked more of the social commentary, because I think she had some really good insights about what it means to be poor, why America has got to this point, and she traces it back to the Reagan era and across both sort of political parties, but the lack of safety net and even the stigma around their welfare system in America, and the fact that you'd rather be broke than accept welfare, which I found interesting. It's not quite the case. I wouldn't say it's quite like that in Australia. I think there's obviously, yes, there's a stigma, but people will take welfare if they need it, as far as I know. So I think it sounds like it's different over there. The other insight that I found interesting was the sense of being excluded from it starting at school, because if you're poor, there are all sorts of barriers to getting a good education. And so starting even as a child, the sense of being excluded from the mainstream and excluded from the system and alienated from the political system, and so that all politicians who are part of that system are the sort of elites who you don't feel part of that. You've been shunned or shamed all your life from that system. And so that to me partly explains Trump and why people in that situation why Trump might appeal to them, because he's very much, whatever you say about what he says or does, he's very much outside the mainstream system, even though he is elite himself in terms of being wealthy. But that just gave me an insight into that sort of mindset and a bit more of an understanding, I suppose. So in that sense, it was good. But on the whole, for me, the memoir I wasn't as interested in. There was a lot of back and forth with lots of different family members, and it's well written, but that didn't interest me as much as the social commentary side. So I preferred Rick Morton's book set in Australia, 100 Years of Dirt. I thought was excellent in terms of the memoir, but then drawing out all the wider issues and the data and the how these things apply across society. I think he did an amazing job in that book. So yeah, some good insights, but I didn't love it. That's Heartland. And then I went to Russia, so I read the Scripple Files by Mark Urban, and this is about the life and near death of a Russian spy, and it's about the Well, it's about Sergei Skripal, and I think it started off actually as a book more about him and his life as a spy. And then in 2018, Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were poisoned with Novichok in Salisbury in England. And so then it became a different sort of story. So that was quite interesting. And it happened as Mark Urban was writing the book. So Mark Urban is really good on diplomacy and spying in general, and the agencies MI5, MI6, and the relationship with Russia and how that goes, how that works. He's written about that before, I believe, and that sort of background was really interesting, and he's very knowledgeable about that, and the change in that, well, the changes that have happened. So the end of the Cold War, and then how that's affected Russian spies who then no longer know what their allegiances are, in a sense, because if their allegiance was, they swore allegiance to the Soviet Union, but that's sort of broken up now. So that has led some of them to then spy for Britain or the US. That's what happened to Skripal. But then also 9/11 has changed things again. So there's the war on terror, which has meant that a lot of resources and political priorities have been put into that area and less on Russia. And then the issue that the US and the UK don't want another Cold War, so they're wanting to stay on good terms with Russia, even when they're faced with evidence that, you know, Russia's committing murder, perhaps even on their soil. So there's been this really interesting dynamic, and that they're walking like a tightrope in some ways. And so he explores that, and I found it really, really fascinating. It ended with, it was a bit anticlimactic, I found, and I think that's because they haven't solved the murder yet. So it's a bit hard for him to say too much. So there's a lot of, it could have been this, it could have been that, and a lot about the process of how they've tried to locate and identify Novichok as the poison, and then it's unsolved. And so it tapered off for me a bit at the end, but again, just really interesting. I like Masha Gessen's writing on Russia, so I find her style a bit cleaner and, well, more accessible for the novice like me who doesn't know all the spy terminology. And also Luke Harding wrote A Very Expensive Poison about the Litvinenko murder, which was also really interesting. So, but this was good as well, The Scripple Files by Mark Urban. So that's it for me. Let me know what you've been reading, and I will see you soon. Bye for now.